Okay, well, we have Jason Brown with us today, our Insights Director. Jason, welcome to Marketing Sweats.
Thank you for having me.
Do you know that you are my only guest that has been on the show twice?
I did not know that, but I'm incredibly honored.
And I love to have you. I know our partnership goes way back, and I'm excited to sort of unpack our topic for today, which is our very first ever primary research report fielded by Jason Brown, Problem Solving Through Partnerships.
I will correct you on one thing. Fielded by Samantle. It was a team effort of which you were instrumental.
Oh, thank you. Well, I can't wait to talk about all the fun we had putting this together. Before we dive into the actual topics of the research, let's start with a little bit about you. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about your background, sort of how you came to Samantle and what you've been doing since?
Yeah. So my background was exclusively in market research. I worked for a couple of different primary research providers in the first 10 or so years of my career. And then a job opportunity and sort of a change of life came up for my wife. We were moving to Peoria. I was beyond blessed that the first interview I took was at Samantle, and I have not left since.
I love that. I remember meeting you and just thinking, oh my gosh, he's so smart. I can't, we never had a researcher before you. We outsourced everything, and you've just brought so much to our business.
Thanks.
Yeah. And you've done a lot of things. You've done marketing analytics, true data guy, right? But you also have this amazing creative side of your brain. And I encourage our listeners to go back and listen to your Point of Pride episode where you talked a little bit about some of the stories of working here at Samantle. How many years have you been here now?
A little over 12, which is crazy. I think the only thing that reflects that as a reminder is the gray hairs on my head. It's not this place, it's my kids, but still, it does not feel like that long, but somehow it has been.
It's hard to believe we've worked together for 12 years. That's awesome. All right, so let's get into the topic for our interview today, and that is this study that we got to work together on over the past year. I'm sure some of our listeners have read it, others may not have, but talk a little bit about why we decided to invest the time and energy to put together our own sort of proprietary intelligence, really stemming from the work we did around our new agency positioning, the Agency of And.
Yeah, I mean, throughout my time at Samantle, I've got the opportunity to work with you, work with others, and we do some really cool stuff for our clients. We get to go out and really dive into their customers, what makes their business tick. And we've been talking for a while about the types of intelligence that we could gather for the agency. Sometimes it was on behalf of our clients, but it was like a perfect storm. We knew that the agency was going to sort of bring a new position into the market. And around that same time, we sort of ramped up conversations of how can we learn about our customers, right? How can we understand what marketers care about, what they think? And so sort of the two things converged, and what we're going to explore today is the output of that.
Absolutely. I know for me, it was always kind of a dream project to be able to sort of have a point of view, right? And I know our point of view in rolling out our brand strategy was this like inherent, intense belief in partnership and relationship and long-term trusted partnerships that actually yield a return. And so while that was the premise for what we wanted to study, we were actually really surprised at the validation of what came back. So talk a little bit about, before we dive in, how we didn't necessarily set out to find out what we did, but it was really reassuring.
Yeah, I mean, to speak in research terms, I would say the instrument that we took out was robust. And it had a lot of information we were trying to cover because, quite honestly, we didn't want to bias what we found. We didn't want it to be self-serving. So while we looked at some elements that are core to our brand, we also looked at things from market leading providers in terms of what do marketers care about, what are their challenges, what's leaning in. And so I want to say we tested somewhere on the order of 70 to 75 statements across a couple of batteries. Like, it's a lot. But there was intentionality behind that. We really wanted to give people the opportunity to weigh in on a multitude of factors to tell us what mattered, what didn't matter, what they thought about themselves, but also what they were seeking in partners or kind of seeking to improve their marketing offerings.
Right. And how they felt not just about themselves and their own vision and values. I remember us using that language a lot, but their organization's vision and values. And talk a little bit about the instrument itself and the methodology. Who did we survey? How did we develop those statements?
Yeah. So we, again, it would have been very easy to say, hey, we're going to go out and just talk to our clients. And I use the phrase often, I don't like echo chambers.
Right.
because if we just talk to those who know us or explore the things, could probably write that report without going through the efforts. So one of the things that we set out to do from the beginning is understand what marketers think. But even within that audience of marketers, we leaned in a little bit more to what I call the working marketers. So people who are on the brand side, or people who are really actively marketing. Then we narrowed it in a little bit more, and we wanted actively working marketing decision makers, because ultimately the people who have the ability to make choice, we wanted to understand what is, what's working for them, what's not, what's keeping them up. And so that's who we talked to. We are, again, really fortunate. We had a target sample of 250 and we exceeded that. We were in the 270 range. And then we also did talk to our clients. I don't want that really important group to think that they were left out. We did reach out to our clients, but we have a market read that sort of reflects the marketplace.
I love that. So as you and I sat down to begin to design the instrument, I remember one of the conversations we had is, when we rolled out Agency Band, we came up with our own beliefs about the way marketing gets done well, and we called them our brand pillars, right? And so I remember sitting down with you and starting to unpack those brand pillars. We use words like bridge, build, become, belong. They just so happen to all start with B. And we asked ourselves, what do those mean to us, right?
It was a great exercise to sort of unpack the ideas and still get sort of the ethos of what we believe and see if it holds true for the market.
Absolutely. So just to say a little bit more about that before we dive into the next phase, there was one particular sort of B word, for lack of a better word, that we call belong. And that was sort of an aspirational part of where we felt marketing might be headed. Even Samantal, as part of our and positioning, was like, what does belong mean in the world of marketing going forward? So talk about your feelings at that time as you were putting together sort of the statements to test that area, and maybe foreshadow a little bit about, where we kind of landed.
Yeah, I see things in numbers and quantitative, and belong, if I'm being fair, is probably the most of the B's. It's the squishiest, right? And sometimes squishy can get a bad rap. In this case, though, I think the other part of my brain that was excited is that it has sort of that relational tissue. It's the glue.
Right.
And so foreshadowing, I think that it testing as important as it did, but in the sense of like important not only to marketers, working marketers, but also their expectations and their agency, I think it was beyond validation for me. It was actually a call out that at the end of the day, marketers want relationships. They want people that they can trust, lean into, and care about. And all of those elements are really what brings belong. Right.
So to put a finer point on that, we tested the upfront part of the process, everything related to insights and strategic direction setting. And then we tested execution and how people felt about bringing the projects to life, measurement strategies. But at the end of the day, the number one value driver in marketing was essentially this idea of partnership. Is that right?
Yeah. And it was, and again, I believe the way that the statement read is, I believe long-term relationships yield effective and efficient solutions, right? So again, a lot of things there, but like long-term relationships and even just the idea of relationships, that was the number one thing from what the marketers cared about. But you pair that with like what they're seeking. And I love that, just again, a partner that cares about long-term partnership. So it's not a supplier, it's not a vendor, it's not the cheapest, it's not the fastest, it's someone who cares. And the reason that they care is because it helps achieve impactful working relationship.
Right. Well, and I think it's really important that we distinguish that even though that rose up as the number one value driver of the 70 plus statements that you tested, what we took from that was not even about agency client relationships, although you could take it there. It was more about the importance of partnership overall in the world of marketing. And there was a part of me, Jason, that after really sitting back and reflecting on that number one value driver, I was like, is that a no duh? Like, should we just know that because that's the field that we're in? Or is there something really insightful about that as marketers go forward and plan their next year's strategies, they really need to think harder about how they're leveraging partners both inside and outside their own walls?
I mean, I certainly lean into the latter. I tend to be an optimist, but I think that it felt like a no-duh to us because we're fortunate that is the way that we operate. In our walls, across our clients, we see our clients as our partners,
Right.
or maybe we strive to be the best partner to them, as opposed to just being transactional.
Right.
There are times and places where transactional is called for or it's needed. I don't want to say that's not the case, but that's not where we strive to be. That's not, frankly, like our strong suit. And so hearing this across a multitude of marketers from different industries, different sizes, different tenures, all of the people who participated really resonating around this idea of relationships is refreshing,
Absolutely.
because it validates kind of our approach, but it also validates that marketers are people too.
Right.
They care.
Well, and for somebody who might be listening who doesn't know our company background, we have been partnering with our largest client, Caterpillar, for over 40 years. And through that relationship, we've built all of these ways that we almost belong to one another in terms of our processes, our ideation, our culture. And so we see the value of that. We even think it's a little bit of our secret sauce in what we have to sell other partners who might want to come on board. But we also encourage that kind of thinking between our clients and their customers. So I want you to talk a little bit about really that idea of and how you made it very clear to me multiple times throughout the process that there is a clear distinction between people who value partnership and people who want to provide direction to a vendor, right?
Well, I think that the data, it very clearly showed that there are people who are looking not only for a partner, but are looking for a trusted partner. And I make that distinction because there's an element of vulnerability, right, that's required in any partnership for it to be successful. But what people are looking for in a partner specifically is someone who holds themselves and their partners accountable. They take accountability for their actions. And this is, while they're saying they want a partner who takes accountability, they're also looking for someone to hold them accountable. But then there's also this realization that a partner needs to be flexible. They need to be at the table. They need to sort of, to some extent, have an understanding of what I need, but also be willing to walk that walk with me.
Sure.
So it's not about sort of the one-time deliverables or the specific moments. It's more a journey, and that's a different mindset than people who are seeking to just give direction. We had another statement that while it scored highly, it was very polarized, and that was listens to me. People who are seeking a partner actually don't score listens to me as high as people who want to be very directive and don't value partnership, because it's like, hear what I have to say, write it down, go execute it, bring it back, thanks, on to the next.
Right. No, I remember a very specific slide that we worked on together where we talked about, sometimes in marketing, we think these big crescendo moments, right? Or the peak of the client experience is what matters. But actually we found in the data, it's the everyday experience, it's the consistency of showing up that builds trust and really yields those long-term relationships.
Yeah. At the risk of this sounding self-help, it would be hard not to say that things that matter in all of your relationships, there's a lot of commonality to our working relationships, and just being present, being accountable, caring, reading each other's sort of reading the room, I think is another one that sort of, while it wasn't a stated attribute, somehow I didn't include that in the 72. It still kind of came up that like understanding each other is really critical to successful partnership and work.
Well, that makes me think, just about the core of branding is really about that. It's those consistent everyday experiences that you really get to know an organization. And I think this data validated. I don't want to lose this idea that you brought up, like the core basics of relationships, right? Relationship dynamics. We were teasing each other as we were going through the process around dating analogies and marriage and falling in love and building up your Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? Like how do we meet people where they are, but then like exceed their expectations? So I know you and I love to like get our creative juices flowing. And when we started thinking about the idea of partnership, we wanted to slice and dice the data more specifically around, do different types of organizations have different needs or mindsets about partnerships? And through a lot of conversation, we ended up thinking about this idea of archetypes and how we can apply the concept of archetypes to organizations. So say a little bit about that part of the work and maybe share a little bit about what those archetypes are.
Yeah. So I'll keep this pretty high level, because otherwise my data geek brain will probably, short circuit the next 20 minutes. we went through, we looked at the data. There was a lot of good stuff at sort of the first pass surface level, looking at stuff across the whole pool of marketers. But then we really challenged ourselves to say, like, okay, we know that not all of our clients are the same. In fact, we know that within a single client logo, we have a multitude of personalities. So we wanted to lean into what are some of those different sort of characters. And so one of the archetypes that we first found, two statements that were really highly scored individually and may not at the surface necessarily seem to fit together. But we looked at this idea of organizations that have a collaborative learning mindset, right? And so that was, we ran some regression in the background, but really these two things that didn't necessarily fit together, that archetype was just about our organization is growth minded and believe in learning and development, right? Which is aspirational, I'd hope, for everyone, right? Like we want to grow, but we want to grow through learning and development. But then we paired that with encouraging diversity of thought and opinion is in our culture, or is core to our culture, right? So it's one thing that we want our people to grow, but also we're not looking for sort of the assembly line, like walk down, like ascend down the offices. Like we're not all doing the same. Like not only do we want people to grow, but we want people to grow in the areas that interest them, that are going to bring those things together.
Right.
That archetype really came together straight from the data in sort of digging into it. Some of the other archetypes, though, were based on a little bit of art and a little bit of science. One of them is just the idea of process, right? Every organization, good, bad, or otherwise, should have process. That's not up for argument. It's if they're actually driven by it. And so this one had the most attributes. It had the most things contributing to it, 4 different ideas, but all around like we make process-driven decisions. And because that one had more statements and it was tighter, it actually ended up to be our smallest archetype. I don't want any of our listeners to think that that means that it's only a select group that have it. It's not that. It's that sort of process, if you will, is the tail that wags that organization.
Sure.
Then we also started to have fun with a couple of other ideas that are things that I'll say that we put hypotheses out, and it wasn't just 2. In fact, we tested, I keep me honest, probably 7 or 8 different ideas.
Right.
But the other 2 archetypes that really emerged were things that we see in our day-to-day.
Right.
One of them is strategy and execution, right? It's people who set goals, they're aligned to those goals, and it's sort of like set, align, execute. Like very sort of, I won't say ROI, but really just metric driven is a focus. And then the last one in today's day and age is something that I think it's emerging. I think if we could go in the Wayback Machine and do this 10 years ago, I don't know that we'd have as many of that last archetype, which is innovation-focused organizations. But within the test or within our survey, what we really found for that group was that it's a combination of being future-focused and thinking about where you want to go, but also having the, I'll say, cultural stability to allow failure. Right? It's not just about, I want to go there, I want to chase what's on the horizon or beyond. It's that I'm willing to let my people swing, even if they miss.
So I love these personalities. For those of us who do this every day, we can probably think about people we work with who are primarily driven by one or more of these archetypes. Talk about the sizing exercise. Which of the types of organizations were the highest and which ones were the lowest?
Yeah. So I think I may have mentioned the collaborative learning. That was the largest. And that's probably not surprising, right? Because if those 2 statements that make it up are things that I feel like any good company should be able to say. Even if it is a little aspirational, they're like, yeah, we want our people to learn and we want to hear what they have to say.
Sure.
So that was the biggest. But again, it's the biggest at 42%.
Oh, okay.
And I would be remiss if I didn't say the way that we went about sizing these, we had a pretty rigid standard because we didn't want people who were good at that. We wanted people who it was on the high end of these scales, the 10-point scales. And so 42% was the largest. The next one, sort of the strategy execution group, that was about 35% of businesses. So about a third fit that criteria. followed by that innovation focus. That was exactly a third, 33%. And then the last one, and I remember lots of debate, particularly with some of our clients or some of the industries that we sort of explore. We tend to encounter more process-driven organizations. But again, if we look at all marketers across all different types of brands and industries, probably not as surprising that, at least from the marketer's perspective, only a quarter of their respective businesses, they would say, are process driven.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's intuitive to me that like you said, organizations can get pretty good at giving everybody a seat at the table, being collaborative, even building strategy and executing. I think process is harder, certainly, to do well and be sort of rigorous about. And I also think that's true of innovation. Would you say that's true?
Yes. I'll tackle the process one first. I think that what we have experienced, or maybe even in our own walls, if I'm being honest, because again, we're marketers too. Sometimes the benefit of a great process can become very quickly the challenge of it. And that is, if not everyone knows it, aligns to it, understands it. And so sometimes organizations that have a lot of process motivations also fall short on like the communication cascade, or the ability for everyone to understand sort of their link in the chain.
Right.
We had one of those statements. So I think that, yes, I think that the construct of it is good, but for organizations small or large, there are barriers to being process driven.
Absolutely, for sure. And like you said several times as we were brainstorming this, like, why does this matter? You know, it's to suggest, and you brought this to my attention, that when organizations know who they are and what they're good at, it often allows them the ability to figure out where they want to go. And I think once we had that conversation and started to sort of correlate some of these data points, we started to ask ourselves, is that essentially what we mean when we say that we believe in the idea of agency, right? And we talked about historically at Simantel, if we can help build people a plan of, you know, here's where we are, here's where we're going to go, here's how we like to work, those are the best partnerships. So say more about how that came into your awareness.
Yeah, I mean, as we were working through these archetypes, or even these examples of agency, it fundamentally, it's understanding where you are, right? So much of life is about context, and so how I make a decision is informed by what I know, what I need, and if I have a firm understanding of where I am, and I'm being honest with myself, right? Like if it's an honest assessment of, these are the things I or my company are good at, and these are the things that we're not, then that helps you to know what you're seeking in a partner, or even in certain scenarios, what you're seeking in a supplier. Like if you can do just a basic needs assessment. And I think it's also really important for the audience to understand, we don't aspire, or we're not saying every person needs to go out and try to fit each of these boxes.
Right.
Like there are very real world or external factors that may contribute to, you know, for companies not being in one or multiple of those buckets. And that's
Right.
okay.
Absolutely.
You just got to know where you are.
You know, as you and I were brainstorming, what do we do with this? You know, this is an interesting what, but what's the so what behind it? And we started to say, what if we overlaid all of these archetypes on top of each other? How does that change what we see in the data? So talk a little bit about how, when we did that, the sample size got smaller and we gave it the label of next level agency.
Yeah, the sample size got a lot smaller. It was less than 1 in 5. I think it's just shy of 18% would be the actual number. So less than 1 in 5 businesses met all 4 of those archetypes, or have, as you said, next level agency.
So when you say met, meaning that they could claim that they felt they or their organization was good in some way, shape, or form in all 4 of those ways, or could bring those skill sets together.
Yeah, they identified, and I would say even more than in some way, shape, or form, like they identified as like, this is us, but all of those 4 were us. So,
Interesting.
So they really felt, confident in their organization. And one of the things as we went through it is we did kind of industry standard, like cleaning and validation. Like while this was looking at people who scored themselves highly, we also had some internal checks to make sure that like we didn't just have straight, everything's a 10, right? There was nuance, there was ability for people to, and in fact, requirements that people scored this. But on these four archetypes, they scored themselves or their organizations highly on all of them.
Yeah, that's so interesting because you also reminded me as we were brainstorming that you didn't feel it should be our agency position to say that marketers should strive for next level agency necessarily, but by identifying or honing in on those organizations that do look at themselves that way, it gave us a new lens to look at how they might look at partnerships.
Absolutely. And I maintain that in the sense that if you, number one, understand where you are, so I may not fit this box, I may not be this archetype, knowing that is still a form of agency.
Sure.
Because I can objectively look at myself. And again, I think that there can be very good reasons why you may or may not have that. Now, that is not to dissuade anyone from, hey, we didn't score as high on this. That's kind of that's piquing my interest. Let's figure out what we can do. Are there blockers we can overcome? Are there internal things that we can level up, or do we need to seek a partner who knows this space and can help us, can walk along with us? Certainly that is a very possible and likely outcome, that when people sort of see where they fit, they may aspire. But by no means am I saying everyone needs to try to go do all of the things.
I think it's a core skill of not just marketing, but leadership and communication to be able to say, hey, this is the kind of organization that we are. And so that tells us our expectations. Let's say we're an entrepreneurial company and we focus heavily on innovation. You're going to be able to communicate to your partners in a different way about what you value in them just by knowing what's important to you. So definitely took that to heart. But I also remember this critical moment on our journey together where you said, hey, Misty, we haven't looked at those who don't have agency, which is still something like 80% of the sample when we look at, the 80-20 rule. And so talk a little bit about when you slice the data that way, what insights came to light.
Yeah. So obviously we've got over 80% of people who don't meet next level agency, but the reality is we have almost half, 47% of our respondents didn't meet any of our four archetypes. So they didn't meet those definitions of agency. And, while that was in and of itself a little bit surprising, if I'm being honest, like that there were some, we know that there are certain groups that are very self-critical. And so, in version 2, we may build in a correction of like, maybe they just don't feel comfortable with anything. But there is a strong cohort that just did not, maybe they had some aspects of some of these archetypes. They didn't meet any of the criteria to fit for any of them. And what we did is we overlaid that group and we said, all right, where are they? We know they didn't score really high on some of the things, but where are they the lowest? Like, what can we really lean into and unpack? And it's stuff that honestly, I think is, I think that this could be a takeaway for marketers. If they're like, hey, I have barriers. They're not future focused, which again is part of one of the archetypes, but also they don't have structured approaches for things like measurement. They're not good at communicating or going through the communication cascade, which I think can affect every one of those archetypes. And they also didn't, they score themselves the lowest of everything in study on knowing how to structure critical conversations.
Interesting.
So if you take the combination of not having agency and not knowing how to raise the flag or have the conversation about what you are not getting or what the blockers are, that feels like it could be a recipe for disaster.
Yeah.
So if
That's
anyone's listening and they feel that they're in that camp, like, I want you to know you're not alone. And this is not like, don't take this as sort of an indictment. I hope that you feel empowered that like there's other people who can help you. Maybe this can help you to sort of have a conversation where it's not your voice. You're like, hey, I found this thing,
right,
and take it in.
So to kind of say what Jason's saying another way, of all these dimensions that we looked at and these archetypes, if people didn't score themselves, what was it, an 8, 9, or 10 on some of these statements or dimensions, then we sort of grouped them together to say, hey, these guys aren't feeling like they have strengths in these areas. And in sort of rating themselves that way, they're also sort of indicating that there's some things about their organization that could be improved. And we see that a lot in our work, especially as marketers, as people seek to be, putting out new and shiny campaigns or doing the next best thing. Sometimes the organizational health in terms of internal communication or keeping your eye on the ball about things that aren't just right in front of you. And so I think that's why as marketers, I know if I was hearing this interview right now or seeing the report, I would be asking myself, where do we fall on this continuum? How would we rate ourselves? And then what would I do with that data if I had it? So I know one of my questions down the line here is going to be, what advice do you have for marketers, or where do we go next with this? What are you hoping to do with this instrument, knowing this was just our first shot, right? We have room to make it better. We have a lot of ways to use it in our work daily. But what are you hoping to do with the instrument from here?
That's a great question. And I think I'm biased, I know, but I think there's a lot of legs and there's a lot of places that this could go. One of the things that I think is on the short-term list is that I want to get a more approachable version.
Sure. Because this was about 20 minutes, right?
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
By more approachable, I mean something that an individual or ideally a team could get through in probably 8 to 10 minutes. Something that they could get in and they could do that self-assessment.
Sure.
A second thing from sort of, I think just the findings is hopefully give people confidence that it's okay to take this and you need to take it honestly, right? Like is woven throughout the idea of partnership or agency. Just give an honest assessment and see where you are, because
Absolutely.
None of these are wrong. In fact, when we were talking about those groups without agency, while we didn't have people go through it, we're confident that some of the people that we work with, that we have great relationships with, definitely don't have next level agency. They may actually be in that camp without having any of those 4 archetypes. That does not make them bad people, bad marketers, bad clients.
Right.
But giving them the data, I think, would help them to know where do I want to grow, where are things that I can go and sort of aspirationally improve, or where are things that I'm not that today, and that's okay because I have a partner or I have someone else who can complement me and sort of help to carry the load.
All right, personal question. So I want to know, what is the one thing you want people to remember as they review this report, and why do you believe it's unique research that can't be found elsewhere? I know that was important to me when we got out of the gate. I didn't want this to be something that they could just Google or Chat GPT, right? Like, what makes this so special?
This is probably a layup, but the number one thing I want people to take away is that for all of the things that marketers do as a battle-hardened market researcher, we're typically one of the industries that gets excluded, right? We get screened out. Typically other brands don't want to hear from marketers, right? Like inside knowledge or whatnot. I hope marketers take away from this that your voice matters and your vulnerability matters. And like you've got data now that you can take back and say, like, I don't have to know everything. Like, I wear a lot of hats, but that doesn't mean that I have to be, I can do so many things well, and it's okay that I've got gaps. Like, I guess vulnerability is something that I hope people can feel comfortable with, because we've all got shortcomings.
I love that. And I could see marketers using this data, once we are able to make it more available as an instrument, to take to their boss and say, look, this is how our organization scored. I need help with communications in this way. But I also see this data as uniquely useful in making the case to a marketer's leaders about how we need to think about partnership differently in the future. I know that I'm shifting my thought patterns on that every single day as we have new capabilities come in, changing expectations on what belonging means and looks like.
In so many of the businesses that we get to partner with, we're customer centric, we're customer first, right? And so that is, and rightly so. I mean, the customer is what makes us a business, right? They're the people who kind of keep us coming back. And so from that perspective, the idea of partnership, I think, is the long-term partnerships are built on trust, and they are built on moving together, but it isn't meant that we don't still have those core tenets of service and sort of kind of understanding. And so one of the things as you were talking, two words that I think came out of this for me, I don't know if they're themes or whatnot, like transparency, which is a weird word in advertising sometimes, but like transparency of like, in order to be trusted and to have that partnership, we need to be fully open with each other.
Right.
And that can mean a partner saying, yes, that is absolutely the need you have. And we can help you, but, you know, willing to say that, but like if there's something that it, you know, maybe there's someone else who could do it better. The other one is curiosity. I'm a curious person through and through. I hope that this sparks a little bit of curiosity. If not, if the only thing is like, I wonder what our scores would have been, good news. In the near future, you'll be able to see that. But just generally, I hope reading this sparks some of that, you know, sparks some of that curiosity and sort of a yearn to learn more.
Absolutely. And really thinking through, as the title says, how leaning into partnerships can solve problems. And I know that that's our why as an organization. We've always believed that we're sort of more than a marketing and advertising agency. Although that we do those things too, we really love to solve problems with our clients at the table. And I think that this research bared that out.
I agree.
Thanks, Jason, for making time. And I hope that we get to do this again, not too far away.
Thank you so much for having me. I am honored to have been the first time.
Yes, definitely. So good to see you. Talk soon.